Listen closely, because the part they never put in the documentaries isn't the blood. It's the design. Rome didn't just punish people. Rome engineered shame like a weapon. Measured, rehearsed, sponsored, and then sold back to the public as entertainment. Picture this: midday heat. Stone seats baking like an oven. 50,000 mouths, one hunger. Not for justice. For collapse. For a human being to be reduced, slowly, until there's nothing left to recognize. And in the center of it all is someone who, a week ago, was untouchable. A name. A family. A future. Now she's a message. They didn't chain her to stop her running. They chained her to tell the crowd, look what we can do to your class too. And the real horror is, everyone is there on purpose. Officials. Performers. Rich patrons in the front row. Ordinary citizens behind them. All participating. Because this isn't random cruelty. This is Rome proving it can destroy you without killing you. And the first humiliation isn't what you think it is, it's what they force her to wear. The tunic is the trick. Not because it's thin. Not even because it's see-through. Because it's wet on purpose. In Rome, humiliation starts before a single blow is thrown. They make sure shame hits first, fast, loud, and unforgettable. Cloth clings. The crowd notices. The victim notices the crowd noticing. And the arena becomes a mirror you can't look away from. Then comes the placard. A wooden sign hung like a curse, painted in red so even the cheap seats can read it. Not a name. Not a crime. A label. Because Rome doesn't want you thinking, that could be my daughter. Rome wants you thinking, that's what traitors look like. And that's when the gates open again. For men walk in, calm, unhurried, carrying props like it's a comedy show. A crude throne. Fake imperial symbols. A whip made to mark, not kill. And the crowd understands before she does. This isn't an execution. It's a performance where the victim is the stage. The lead actor steps close enough that she can smell him. Then he says the line meant to spread like fire through 50,000 people. She thought she was a queen. And right there, before the first act even begins, Rome does something that feels impossible. They don't just take her dignity. They make the crowd ask for more. Here's the part that should chill you. Rome didn't rely on rage. It relied on a schedule. Because what happens next isn't a mob getting carried away. It's a sequence. A blueprint. A ritual designed by people who consider themselves civilized. They sit her on the throne like it's an honor. Then strip the honor out of it, piece by piece. A mock coronation. A rotten wreath. Laughter timed like thunder. Then petitions, like she's still powerful, except every request is a trap. Every answer is scripted. Every word out of her mouth is another nail in her own identity. Rome understood something brutal. If they can force you to say it, they don't even have to convince anyone. And the crowd doesn't just watch. They participate. They shout suggestions. They chant. They point. They throw things that don't kill, because killing is too quick. Too clean. Not memorable enough. This is how you turn punishment into a disease that spreads. But the smartest part of the design is what Rome does when the victim's mind tries to escape. Because after enough shame, something happens to a person. The face goes blank. The eyes drift. The body moves, but the soul pulls away. Modern people call it dissociation. Rome called it a problem. And when the actors notice she's gone, they don't stop. They escalate. Because the final phase was never about pain. It was about exposure. They built the arena so nowhere could you hide. Not from Rome. Not from the crowd. Not from yourself. And when they escalate, they don't reach for a sword. They reach for a platform. Higher. Brighter. Centered. Because humiliation in Rome is a visibility problem. The more people who see it, the more useful it becomes. A senator's daughter on a raised stand isn't just a victim, she's a broadcast. They strip away the last excuses. The last coverings. The last distance between her body and 50,000 staring eyes. And then they do something even worse than violence. They make her hold still. Motionless. Silent. Not allowed to curl up. Not allowed to turn away. Not allowed to perform her suffering in a way that earns sympathy. Just displayed. Like an object. Like a warning sign made of skin. Meanwhile, the lead actor delivers a speech, not to her, to everyone else, about law, loyalty, order, and what happens when families forget their place. This is Rome's real genius. They punish one person and educate an empire. And then, when the crowd is finally full, when the message has sunk in deep enough to live inside people's nightmares, Rome ends it the way you would least expect. They don't kill her. They remove her. Alive. Because a dead girl is a moment. But a living survivor is a rumor that never stops walking. The worst part wasn't the arena. It was the next morning. Because now she has to exist in a city that saw everything. Every street becomes another audience. Every glance feels like the Colosseum all over again. Rome understood that if you let the victim live, the punishment keeps working for free. No guards needed. No chains. Just memory. And Lucia, if she even still feels like Lucia, becomes a moving lesson to every noble house that ever considered whispering the word resistance. Fathers stop plotting. Brothers stop boasting. Mothers hold their daughters tighter, not out of love, but out of fear of what Rome can do without spilling blood. That's the perversion of it. The humiliation is treated like statecraft. Like policy. Like a clever compromise between mercy and terror. But here's what most people still don't realize. This wasn't rare. Rome didn't do this once because it was angry. Rome did it again and again because it was effective. And it wasn't limited to traitors, either. If you were conquered, Rome could parade you. If you were poor, Rome could brand you. If you were a woman, Rome could weaponize your body. If you were a man, Rome could turn you into entertainment. And in the next part, you're going to see the most public humiliation Rome ever invented, one that didn't need an arena at all. It needed a road. Rome's victory wasn't complete until your defeat had a front row seat. They called it a triumph. Sounds noble. Almost beautiful. But if you were on the wrong side of it, a triumph was a moving cage. 3 miles of slow-motion humiliation through streets packed with cheering strangers. First came the treasure. The gold. The weapons. The statues ripped from temples. And then, after the objects, came the people. Chained just heavy enough to hurt. Light enough to keep you walking. Because collapsing ruins the show. Rome's genius was pacing. They understood anticipation. So they saved the best prisoners for near the end. Leaders, royals, anyone whose fall would feel delicious to a crowd. Imagine it, you're a commander who once had men willing to die for you. Now you're being paraded between strangers who spit your name like it's a joke. And when the procession reaches the forum, when the noise is at its peak, Rome does the cleanest, coldest thing of all. They separate one captive. Not to free him. To make the crowd feel the snap of finality. Some were executed beneath the city's feet while the celebration kept moving above, like death was just another drumbeat in the parade. And if you survived, Rome had plans for you next. Because the triumph wasn't the end of your humiliation. It was your introduction. Now we go from streets to the arena again. Because Rome had a punishment that sounds simple, until you understand how deliberately they made it degrading. Condemned to the beasts. Most people picture a quick death. Rome rarely gave quick. They treated animals like props in a horror play. They timed the gates. They trained the handlers. They starved the predators just enough. Not to guarantee a kill, to guarantee a spectacle. Sometimes the victim could run, just long enough for the crowd to choose a favorite moment to scream. Sometimes they couldn't run at all. Staked. Tied. Forced to face the gate like it's a sunrise they'll never survive. And then comes the sickest layer, the costumes. Rome loved turning death into theater. They dressed victims as mythological characters, people who deserved to be torn apart in old stories, so the crowd could pretend they were watching culture, not cruelty. Here's what that does psychologically. It tells the audience, this isn't a human being. This is a role. A prop. A lesson. And if the animal didn't finish the job fast enough, if the victim lived too long, or worse if the crowd got bored, Rome had a backup plan waiting at the edge of the sand. A blade. Not to honor the dead. To keep the show on schedule. And the next reveal is going to make you see Rome differently. Sometimes, the most civilized humiliations didn't involve blood at all. They involved paperwork. Rome could destroy you with ink. Not a sword. Not a beast. A label that followed you everywhere like a shadow. It was called infamia, a legal stain so permanent it didn't just punish your body. It erased your position in society, then made everyone else enforce the erasure for you. One court decision, and suddenly, you can't vote. You can't hold office. You can't testify. Your word becomes legally worthless, like you're alive, but already dismissed. And the humiliation wasn't private. Records were posted. Names were known. Whispers moved faster than soldiers. Even if you stayed quiet, the city spoke for you. That's what made it perfect. You didn't need guards. You didn't need chains. Rome turned the public into the prison. Friends stopped greeting you. Clients disappeared. Marriage offers evaporated overnight. And here's the truly twisted part, it didn't just hit you. It poisoned your family. Your children's futures. Your daughter's marriage prospects. Your household's honor. Rome understood social life is oxygen. Cut it off, and the victim suffocates in plain sight. So when you hear public humiliation, don't think only of arenas. Sometimes the most perverted Roman punishment was making you wake up every day and realize you're still breathing. But you no longer count as a person. And in the next part, we hit the most famous Roman entertainment of all, where survival itself became humiliating. Because in Rome, even living could be a sentence. A gladiator wasn't just a fighter. A gladiator was a living contradiction Rome loved to exploit. Cheered like a star, and legally treated like dirt. If you were forced into the arena, Rome took your name first. Then your rights. Then your future. You became property trained to entertain the same society that called you disgraced. And the humiliation wasn't only the violence. It was the bargaining. You fight well, the crowd screams for you. You fight poorly, the crowd asks for your death. You beg for mercy, and 50,000 people decide whether your life has earned another day. Imagine the psychological trap: win, and you survive to be used again. Lose, and you die in front of everyone. Either way, Rome owns your story. Even the training was built to break you. Cells. Shackles. Control. Food measured like fuel. Beatings not to kill, just to remind you your body belongs to someone else. Then the gate opens. Sun hits your face. The roar hits your chest like a shove. And Rome watches you do something that changes a person forever. You kill for applause. That's the perversion. Not that they made men die. That they made men perform dying as culture. And just when you think the arena is the bottom, Rome had one more humiliation that went even further. Because some punishments weren't meant to end your life. They were meant to erase your memory. Rome didn't always want you dead. Sometimes Rome wanted you deleted. They had a practice so cold it feels modern, the state deciding your name shouldn't survive you. Statues pulled down. Faces chiseled off coins. Inscriptions scraped until there's only stone scars where a person used to be. It wasn't just punishment, it was a warning to anyone watching. We can take your life, and then take the proof you ever mattered. And the crowd helped. That's what made it terrifying. Ordinary people rushed in, not because they hated the person, but because they feared being seen as sympathetic. So they spit on bronze faces. They kicked broken marble. They cheered while history got rewritten with hammers. This is how humiliation becomes contagious. When everyone is forced to participate, everyone becomes complicit. And once you're complicit, you defend the system, because admitting it's wrong means admitting what you did. So by the time you return to Lucia, and you picture her walking out alive into the streets, you realize Rome didn't need to keep humiliating her. Rome had already taught the city how. She becomes a moving echo. A living reminder that a single accusation can turn privilege into a stage, a family into a cautionary tale, a person into a punchline. And now we land the final twist. The part that ties every perverted spectacle together. Because Rome's public humiliations weren't proof of chaos. They were proof of control. Rome's cruelest invention wasn't the Colosseum. It was the idea that shame could be infrastructure. A system. Something you build so well it runs even when you're not looking. That's why all these humiliations feel connected. The wet tunic, the placard, the forced performance, the parade through the streets, the beasts, the legal stain, the arena fame that's actually legal disgrace, the erasing of your face from stone. Different methods. Same message. You do not belong to yourself. And once a society accepts that message, it spreads into everything. People start policing each other's behavior. Families start sacrificing their own to stay safe. The crowd learns to confuse cruelty with order. Because order feels comforting when you're afraid. That's what Rome sold, safety through spectacle. If you're a spectator, you leave thinking, good. The world is under control. But the real control isn't over criminals. It's over everyone watching. Because after you've cheered a broken person, it's harder to imagine standing up when it's your turn. You don't just fear punishment. You fear becoming entertainment. So when history books show you aqueducts and marble statues, remember, Rome didn't only build water systems. Rome built a machine that turned human dignity into a public resource. And the most unsettling part? It worked. Not for a year. Not for a decade. 4 centuries. So here's the payoff. the thing that makes the title sting. Ancient Rome's most perverted public humiliations weren't just extreme. They went too far because they didn't stop at the victim. They reached into the crowd. They trained ordinary people to enjoy power's cruelty, and call it culture. Lucia steps out of the Colosseum alive, and that's the real sentence. Because now the city is her arena.
Every day. Every stare. Every whisper.
Rome doesn't need to touch her again. Rome has already taught 50,000 witnesses how to finish the job. And somewhere in that crowd sits a young boy watching, learning a lesson he'll never forget. That dignity is conditional. That status is fragile. That the state can turn a human life into a public joke with the right paperwork and the right stage. That boy grows up.
He becomes a citizen. A soldier. A father.
And when the next spectacle comes, he brings his children. That's how an empire makes cruelty feel normal. Not by hiding it. By making it tradition. So when you think of Rome, don't only picture glory and marble. Picture the machinery underneath it, the rehearsed humiliation, the legal stains, the public participation, the survivors forced to keep living inside a story they never chose. Because once a society learns to weaponize shame this well, it doesn't need chains on everyone. Only on the few, so the rest behave. You might think, okay, that was the state.
The arenas. The courts. The parades.
But Rome's humiliation machine had a quieter setting too. One that didn't need 50,000 spectators. It only needed your neighbors. Because in Roman life, the most effective shame wasn't always shouted from the Colosseum. Sometimes it was baked into daily survival, into who was allowed to stand tall, and who had to lower their eyes. There were people whose job alone made them untouchable.
Actors. Prostitutes. Executioners.
Even when the crowd loved them, the law treated them like contamination. Rome created a caste of necessary people it could publicly use, and privately despise.
That's not an accident.
That's leverage. If your livelihood is considered dishonor, you can be controlled forever. You can be threatened with exposure even when you're already exposed. You can be punished simply by being seen in the wrong place, with the wrong person, at the wrong time. And this is where it gets truly uncomfortable. A society that normalizes humiliation at the top will eventually use it at the bottom, for fun. Which means the next story isn't about a senator's daughter. It's about an ordinary Roman, someone with nothing to lose, who discovers Rome can still take the one thing left.
He's not famous.
That's why this works.
A dock worker. A street seller.
A man whose entire life is routine, work, bread, a rented room, and the small dignity of being unseen. Until one day he's accused.
Not of treason.
Not of rebellion.
Of disrespect.
A wrong look at the wrong official.
A muttered insult.
A complaint said too loudly. The kind of crime that feels harmless, until you realize Rome treats obedience like religion. They don't need the Colosseum for him. They need a corner.
A platform.
A crowd that gathers because crowds always gather. They march him out with his hands tied, not because he's dangerous, because it makes everyone else feel safe watching him helpless. A clerk reads the charge with the same calm tone you'd use to announce the weather. Then comes the punishment that feels almost childish, until you imagine it happening to you. They force him to wear a ridiculous outfit.
Something feminizing. Something mocking.
Something meant to announce, this man is beneath you. They shave his hair in a pattern that makes him recognizable for weeks.
Not for hygiene. For branding.
And then they make him do the one thing a proud person hates more than pain. They make him apologize.
Loudly. In public. Over and over. Not to the official. To the crowd.
Because Rome isn't correcting behavior. Rome is training witnesses. And just when he thinks it's over, when he thinks he can go home and hide, they turn him around, and he sees what the clerk has been holding the entire time. A tablet with his name. Not for history. For a list. That list is where Rome keeps the real punishment. Because once your name is written down the wrong way, you don't just leave with shame. You leave with a target.
It's subtle at first.
A landlord suddenly doesn't have a room. A shopkeeper refuses credit. Someone you've known for years stops meeting your eyes in the street, like looking at you might stain them too. Not because they hate you. Because Rome taught them something simple: distance is safety. And the victim feels it immediately, the terrifying shift from being a person in a city to being a problem people avoid. Then Rome tightens the loop. A patrol stops you for no reason. A magistrate remembers your face. A neighbor reports you because it's easier than being suspected themselves. The humiliation becomes a chain reaction. And here's the darkest twist: The crowd that laughed at you yesterday now gets to pretend they were never involved. They call it order. They call it respect. They call it discipline. But it's really a system that turns everyone into a possible informant, and every mistake into a public lesson. Now connect that back to Lucia, to the triumph prisoners, to the condemned in the arena.
Different people. Different crimes.
Same mechanism: isolate, expose, label, repeat. And in the next part, we hit the point where Rome goes from humiliation to something even more invasive, something they used specifically because it destroyed not just the victim, but the victim's entire family line. Rome didn't only punish your body. It punished what your body meant to other people. In a culture where family honor was everything, your name, your bloodline, your marriage alliances, Rome figured out the cleanest way to burn down a household without touching the walls. They attacked reputation through the most intimate doorway: sexuality. Not because it was taboo. Because it was strategic. If Rome could mark someone as sexually ruined, the damage spread outward like poison.
Suitors vanished.
Dowries collapsed. Families who once nodded at you in public suddenly acted like you were heir. And the humiliation wasn't always a rumor. Sometimes it was staged. A forced wedding that was really a parody. A public stripping framed as inspection. A spectacle that didn't have to show explicit detail to do maximum harm, because the audience filled in the rest with their imagination, then carried the story home. Rome understood that suggestion can be more powerful than proof. Because proof ends the conversation. Suggestion becomes a legend. And a legend becomes a permanent punishment. This is where the phrase "went too far" stops being a figure of speech. Because when humiliation weaponizes sex, the victim isn't the only one sentenced. Parents are punished. Siblings are punished. Future children who will never be born are punished. And now, in the next part, I'm going to show you how Rome turned mythology into a humiliation machine, forcing real people to act out their own destruction like it was art. Rome loved myths because myths come with built-in permission. If a story says a character deserves a cruel ending, the crowd can watch cruelty and feel cultured instead of guilty. So Rome did something almost unreal: it fused punishment with theater. Not metaphorically. Literally. They'd take condemned people and cast them as characters in famous legends, stories everyone knew since childhood. And then they'd stage the ending using real bodies. A man plays a criminal who gets burned alive, and suddenly the arena is a set. A woman is dressed like a doomed heroine, and suddenly her terror becomes a reenactment. A victim is forced to crawl, beg, sing, or kneel on cue, so the audience doesn't see a human being trying to survive. They see a performance going well. And this is where humiliation becomes perverse in a specific Roman way: the victim isn't allowed to suffer privately. They're required to suffer artistically.
To hit their marks. To say the lines.
To make it entertaining. Because if you can force someone to perform their own degradation, you don't just break them physically, you break the part inside them that believes they're real. But Rome always had a final lever to pull if the crowd started to lose interest.
A sudden twist. A new prop. A new animal. A new act.
And in the next part, we're going under the arena, into the tunnels, where the real terror started days before anyone ever saw the show. The arena floor was the lie. The real colosseum, the part designed to break you, was underneath. Down there in the hypogeum, you didn't see sunlight.
You heard it. You smelled it.
You felt it as heat and vibration through stone while the crowd screamed for someone else. And Rome made sure you could hear everything. Chains dragging. Metal gates slamming. Animals pacing in cages close enough that you could hear the wet breath between growls. Sometimes you'd hear a man pray. Sometimes you'd hear him stop. That was the point, to teach you the ending before your scene even began. Guards didn't have to beat you constantly. They did something smarter. They controlled time. Food. Sleep. Information. They'd tell you what might happen, then change the details, so your mind couldn't settle on any single fear.
Fear multiplied.
Then came the worst sound of all. The lift mechanism.
Wood creaking. Ropes tightening. The platform rising.
Because when that lift moved, someone was being delivered into daylight like meat into a market. And you'd wonder every time, is it me? That question is its own torture. By the time your gate finally opened, the humiliation already started. Your nervous system was already shattered. Your legs already weak. Your brain already searching for ways to leave your body. Which meant when you stepped onto the sand, Rome had you exactly where it wanted you. Alive enough to react. Broken enough to obey. And in the next part, we hit the moment Rome perfected the crowd itself, how spectators were trained to become a weapon, not just an audience. Rome didn't just build arenas.
Rome built behavior.
Because a crowd isn't naturally united. A crowd has to be taught what to want, when to roar, who to hate, what to celebrate. That's why the seating mattered. Not just for status. For psychology. The elite sat close, where they could see facial expressions, tears, trembling hands. Their presence signaled approval. This is acceptable. The common citizens sat behind them and learned the emotional cues. The enslaved and outsiders were pushed up high, reminded physically, by distance, that they were closer to becoming victims than decision-makers. Then the show begins, and the crowd starts doing Rome's work. They chant labels. They repeat the placard's message until it becomes a truth. They laugh at the forced costume, so the victim's body becomes a joke. They demand escalation, so officials can say, "We gave the people what they wanted." And that's the genius. Responsibility gets diluted. No single spectator feels like a monster, because everyone's clapping together. No single official feels guilty, because the crowd is asking. No single emperor looks cruel, because he's maintaining order. So the humiliation becomes a loop. The state shapes the crowd, and the crowd justifies the state. And once that loop exists, it doesn't need constant violence.
A rumor is enough. A sign is enough.
One person's public destruction can discipline 1,000 others in private. Which brings us to the final, ugliest truth about Rome's humiliations that went too far. Sometimes the goal was never deterrence. Sometimes it was entertainment so profitable, the empire needed victims to keep it running. And in the next part, we expose that marketplace.